Welcome to Cuba. It's actually halfway through our first full day on Cuba, so real quick, I'm going to catch you up to speed. First, yesterday in Miami, we met the whole group, got our paperwork, and flew on our chartered flight to Havana, Cuba, where I was amused to see the guards at the airport manually opening and closing what are usually automatic doors. Got our first glimpses of old cars, plus new cars as a sign that Cuba is changing. Met our guide Alicio, whose command of Havana knowledge and Cuban knowledge is fantastic. This is a great thing about doing a trip like this. You've got somebody who knows so much. You learn so much more than if you were just wandering around by yourself. Headed to the hotel with a pit stop at a grocery store for water and snacks, where I was asked to stop filming after I showed the very empty deli counter.
Cupboards are kind of bare, huh?
Not a whole lot going on in the meat and cheese section. No filming? Is that no?
No.
Okay. It is very clear that Cuba is still much under embargo and does not have free flow of goods in or out as much as they would like. Checked into the hotel, then went out for dinner at the Cafe Laurent. Delicious mojitos, delicious food, and fun after dinner rum shots. Plus a gorgeous view of the sunset from up there. Called it a pretty early evening, got up this morning and headed to the Center for Cuban People's Relationship with other people that aren't Cuban. Basically, a little talk about how the government would like the relationship between the Cuban people and governments of other places, especially America, since we're all Americans, to be better. Then we headed to a government-run school for special needs students to make sure that we know that Cuba takes care of their students with special needs. Certainly feels a little propagandish, but that is part of this tour, this cultural exchange, and to be on an approved one, you do have to do some of these sanctioned events, and it was quite interesting. Now we're having another wonderful meal, a lunch at this Cafe Molin, I think is the name, and we're now, this afternoon, gonna get to some serious, awesome photography. Walking around Old Town Havana, the textures, the faded colors, the clothes hanging on the lines to dry, and the people. So much character, so much to photograph here. It's still a little bright, so you can stick to the shadows and try to avoid the brighter areas of the sky, avoid blowing out those highlights, but there's plenty to shoot without that. And these alleyways are usually 2 or 3 stories deep, it seems like, so plenty of shade to work with. So we've just been walking the streets in this Old Town section of Havana for the last hour. It's just fascinating. You look back through these archways into the interiors of these buildings, and some of them are completely falling apart, but you can see people's clothes hanging up to dry. People live back in there, up in these buildings. Some of them you look in and it's a very nicely furnished apartment with all of the structure intact, but many of them it is not. A lot of these buildings there's not been any money to renovate or any materials to renovate for 50, 60, 70 years or more. And the weather conditions with hurricanes can be pretty rough. So we're on this walking tour of Old Havana. And one of the things we've been talking about over the last couple of days is the fact that it used to be a walled city. It took 120 years to wall it all up back in the 16 to 1700s, but some of that foundation is right behind us. And there's even a few cannons sticking out. When the Americans took occupation, they didn't want the Spaniards to get their hands on this, so they took all of the cannons in the area and they buried them. And in slightly more modern times, back there at that restaurant, Beyonce and Jay-Z recently had dinner. One of the oldest squares of Havana is back behind us. The building's built in 1720, but right now I'm standing outside La Boguita del Medio. And this was a bar, there we go, that Hemingway hung out at, and other famous people as well. And you can sign your name on the walls outside or inside. It's a little early in the morning, so there's no inside right now. The light is beautiful on me right now, but the sun is back here. Check this out. This building here is acting as a giant reflector to all of us back here. It's nice. It's a great spot for photos. So we've been walking around what's called Arms Square because the Spanish used to do their drills and marches here when Cuba was occupied by Spain many years ago. Down at our feet, I was looking at these and I thought, these bricks look funny. They're made out of wood because the governor's wife lived right up there in that building hundreds of years ago. And at night, she was really bothered by the horses' feet on the cobblestones. So she had slaves replace all of the cobblestones with wood so it would be nice and quiet. So we're standing in one of the restored houses that was at one time very grand, and then people moved in as the rich people moved out prior to the revolution when they wanted to go out to the outskirts of the city where it was cooler with more space. Then things started to deteriorate. People moved in, as I talked to you about, in the old section of Havana, and this is the area that's being restored. This is a gorgeous building now. 3 families have moved back in since the government has restored this. What's interesting is how much it reminds me of what the Roman houses look like in Pompeii, with these big open courtyards, big tall columns. It's very beautiful. So we've been hanging out in the Center for Photography here in Havana. I'm going to call this the new Old Havana. I think I've said that before. Amazingly restored. This is up above the Fountain Plaza, or Fuente de la Plaza of Vieja. It's good. The restoration that they've done in this area is amazing. It's beautiful and colorful. And it gives you a great sense of what this place must have looked like in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when all of this was at its peak. Just absolutely gorgeous. But man, they have a lot of restoration, renovation ahead of themselves. And you can see just beyond the square back there behind me, some of what I'm calling the real Old Havana. Okay, now, look like you're arresting me. Hold my hand back, like I'm getting, it's just. Arrest. In jail. Jail.
$5 arrestado.
No.
¿Arrestado?
3 pesos. 3 pesos.
Por 3 pesos, ¿cuánto le van a poner?
Just hold this arm. Hold this. Yeah, there you go. You got to make sure you see the camera.